morning to you, Romeo Wosiko. This is Chambogo. I'm coming to you from the office of the Director of the Education Standards at the Directorate of Education Standards in the Ministry of Education and Sports. But today, we know that the wait is coming to an end for those who sat for USCE in 2020, but of course they sat the exams in 2021, and now the ministry will be releasing these results. I think probably between midday and 2 you'll be able to know what exactly came out of these results. But for now, let's understand how the impact of COVID-19 on the performance of these students, but also on the general learning of our students. To begin with, first of all, good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, too, for welcoming us. And now that we are expecting these results, first bring us to speed. What is the impact of COVID-19 on the students' learning? Because many of these students were waiting to see the exams in 2020, but when you got the lockdown, this could have impact on their learning and, of course, subsequently to their performance.
Well, first of all, we have had already 2 sets of results being released. The PLE about a month ago and the UCE about 2 weeks ago. Incidentally, in both of the 2 sets, performance generally was better than 2019. So, using that kind of assumption, we would then think that hopefully these ones will also be good results. Yes, definitely the closure was abrupt and disruptive, but the candidates who have sat exams this year did not lose much in terms of time for their courses. As a country, we run a level, we run a curriculum that covers a level. So for primary, for example, it's a curriculum that covers 7 years, P1 to P7. For O-level, it's a curriculum that covers 4 years, Senior 1 to Senior 4. And also for A-level, it's 2 years. So the material that is examined is for the whole course. It's a spiral curriculum, one builds into another. And so when the disruption happened, for these candidates whose results we've been releasing and whom we are going to release today for A-levels, they had done all their pre-year fully. And they had started on their final year by 20th March when we closed. And when we closed, like all of you know, my fellow Ugandans, we all hoped it would be 2 weeks, and we hoped it would just be 1 month. So there was a lot of hope and anticipation, and children continued studying at home. And because our curriculum is spiral and covers a season, they were continually reading and revising and going through the areas they had already covered. So when we opened for candidates on 15th of October, they had about 2 months from October to December. But also, like for these results we are releasing today, they had another almost 4 months because they reported back early January and started exams in April.
Okay, Dr. Canon Kedwes Triagenda, the director here at the Directorate, I want to understand, there's a question that has been boggling many people about are we going to have the double shifts or even students in classes, for those who were, of course, those who were in the first year, and now we're also releasing another batch. What's going to be happening in the universities, but also in these secondary schools and the primary schools?
I just conclude on what I was saying. So I'm anticipating good results. And I hope that parents and children are doing the same. We will not have double classes because we wouldn't fit them in class anyway. We are going to have them progress. And I think this has been the commitment from the beginning. You remember last year, the minister said, we are committed to ensure that we have no dead year. So all the plans we've made back and forth, and they have to be back and forth because we really don't have authority over COVID-19 and the phases and how it comes around. But all the planning has been that we bring in learners in a staggered phased manner. They have a portion of learning and they can progress. And because it's a level, even if they may not have finished like what was for S1, it is still part of what they should do in 4 years. So we guided the schools and said, it will continually be done. Don't say, now you've finished S1, we are starting S2, there is material left behind. No, you start where you stopped, and progressively work should be covered. So I think we'll have space for the incoming P1, S1, and S5.
Your directorate that is entirely looking at the standards of our students and the general learning of students in Uganda has to be worried about this pandemic, because when you try to go online, there are schools, there are institutions like universities and technical tertiary institutions which are not yet up to date with the technology. We'll talk about far-reach areas. How is this going to affect the learning of our students?
The guidance, since we allowed higher institutions and universities to actually use the e-systems for learning, we were aware, because you and I know that about 70% of our people live in the rural places. They cannot access sometimes internet even when they want. The families can't afford data. We are aware of all this. So we said, yes, let each institution come up with a program of one, ensuring that if they have a program, all their learners, because they can have them recorded as they attend lessons and know who is not and who is actually learning. And two, we guided that when an opportunity comes for face-to-face, then there should be that kind of catch-up opportunity, so that none of the institutions, in any institution of learning, you know that those are living in cities and towns, even for the lower levels, they are having e-lessons. And we are saying, yes, we're having e-lessons, but our commitment is equality and equity. So once a child is registered in your school, whether he was able to access what you sent on Zoom or whether was not able to, when they come back, start from where he stopped, so that all the learners benefit. There
is a letter, there are two letters that are already out, and you serve in the ministry, serve in the government, Ministry of Education, but also you serve in the Church of Uganda. I've seen a letter coming from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Madam Lamaro, going to heads of the directors and school heads to stop. She's saying they should stop the board members.
Is that the separation of roles?
Exactly,
yes.
separation
I've
of roles.
seen it, yeah.
And that is also one coming from the Church of Uganda, Provincial Secretary Bishop Ongeng, saying that you should halt the implementation of the guideline, the letter from Minister of Education, stopping you from allowing the board chairpersons and board members from being signatories to bank accounts. This is likely also to incur on the negatively on the operations of these institutions. And how will that also put you in a collision course, because you serve two masters at the same time, but also the learning of the students?
Well, it's not going to be a collusion course. I've read the PSC's letter. I've not read the Church of Uganda response. But as a sector, we treasure all our stakeholders. And churches, religious institutions form the greatest part of the institutions that we have. So they are key stakeholders, they are foundation bodies. They are part and parcel of our act. They have roles and responsibilities. So we treasure their work. We work with them. We consult with them on many things. They sit on some of our high-level committees. So if that letter has come, I think an understanding will be reached to explain. But what I saw in the PSC's letter, which is actually refer to another one of 2018 of exactly the same material, was to guide institutions to know that there is a management level. Those are the implementers. Those are the accountable people. For example, in a school system, the head teacher is the accounting officer. Now, if you are the chair, and maybe you are a reverend chair from Church of Uganda, and you are the chairperson, and you are signing on checks, and you have a scrupulous head teacher, you sign on a check, but he goes and writes a voucher that is different. When audit comes, both of you who signed will be held accountable. And yet you are at a governance level. You are supposed to be checking, you head teacher and your team, the BASA and others who are signatories, are you actually doing the right things we agreed in the budget? Are you spending according to the budget guidelines which were approved? Are you actually getting value for money? But when you've been part of the signatory, it's tricky. It can be very dangerous. So I think we shall definitely discuss with our key stakeholders on what they think the impact is. But in the meantime, usually when there is a change of anything, people have to write, have to have a meeting, generate a minute, then write to the banks, things like that. That would happen.
So you also be safe in your position?
Yes, we be
Okay.
safe, yes.
Now, as we plan to go for the reopening of schools, I want to understand what's now the thinking, the latest, because I saw the statement from the Minister of Education and Sports, Honorable Janet Kataha-Museveni, trying to call for vaccinations, but also we know the vaccines are not really available. What's the thinking now? What's the plans for reopening of schools?
The plans for reopening of schools are that we shall open. And that's the good news. We will open, our children will go back to school. The details of that, we are working through it. And as you have known since COVID-19, any big decision that could congregate people together has to go through a series of levels. So as a sector, we have great plans, but they have to go to the COVID task force, they have to go to cabinet. So before that is done, you wouldn't give it as a public news because it can be misinterpreted. However, the plans are there, they are candid plans, and we hope that every learner will learn. However, as we prepare for that, my appeal, which I have always made, is that learning starts at conception and ends at death. So wherever young people are, let us, we the adults, the parents, the guardians, the aunties and uncles and grandparents, whoever, and any adults, let us try to help our children to keep learning. Because learning is not just in class, learning is much more. And a lot of skills we learn, Stephen, which you are using now to interview me, I don't think you learned them in class. You just had a tip up at some training at some point. But relating with people, understanding issues, interpreting them, came along as you grew up. As you went with your father, I don't know whether you did, like me, to the banana plantation. So let learning continue, let our children be kept safe, and my appeal to all of us as Ugandans, let us observe the SOPs. The sooner we do that and our communities are safe, the faster schools will be opened.